Welcome to the Super Subs. This is a podcast with
Andrew Smith.
and my name's Harry Liu, and we're going to talk about anything and everything related to soccer, aka football. We're actually going to start calling the sport football as it is known around the world in a lot of places besides the U.S. starting next week. But if you hear the terms soccer and football interchange, just know we're referring to the same sport, not the NFL, but football around the world. So this week, we're going to do a little bit of an intro of what this podcast is. This is our first ever episode, our kickoff episode, as well as an intro on ourselves, what the name of the podcast comes from, and also how we got into football, and we'll go from there. So today's episode is going to actually be about what makes the game of football, whether it's a match or a team or the sport in general, so interesting to watch. Let's go through an intro first of ourselves and our background, and then what a super sub is and why we named this podcast the Super Subs Podcast. My name's Harry. Andrew and I have known each other for quite a few years now. We met through our partners a few years back, and both our spouses are very dear college friends. They were actually roommates together for all 4 years of college. So I first got into the sport of football or soccer when I was growing up playing, I guess, little league for soccer here in the U.S. We all have different soccer camps, and it's more so used as after school daycare for a lot of parents here in the U.S. You'll have regular school from 7 or 8 to 3 p.m. and then you'll go to soccer practice from 3 to 5:30 or 6 p.m. and then you'll go back home. So I grew up watching the sport, and then growing up loved watching different players, obviously from Europe or the UK or England. So Andrew, how did you get into the sport of football? What makes you passionate about it? What's your background?
Yeah, thanks, Harry. I grew up playing. I played back when I was probably about 4 or so. Played AYSO for those Americans.
Yes, AYSO.
That know what that is. I played all the way up to college and played some just intramurals through college. Like Harry, grew up playing it after school, playing it on the weekends. Parents trekked me around all across the state to play. Made a lot of my best friends through the game, and grew up loving the sport, loving watching it, loving following players abroad, like Harry, avid Manchester United fan. Try not to be too biased here.
So an intro of what a super sub is. So the name, the Super Subs Podcast, that's our podcast name, of course. If you're listening to this, you probably found us either through word of mouth or on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or any other podcast streaming platform. A super sub, you might have guessed it from the name, is a substitute. And a super sub is a substitute that comes on in the game of football and changes the game around. Whether it's someone that's a playmaker and connects the ball from the back line to the front line and makes the game that much more electric, whether it's someone that comes on and just scores a goal immediately. We've had plenty of people that we've seen do that before, or whether it's someone that comes on and makes a huge save or keeps a clean sheet for the defense and keeps the team solid. We decided to name the podcast that just to give a little bit of a shout out to players that we've known as super subs. I mean, Andrew, who do you think you would think of when you hear of the name Super Subs? What's the first player that comes to mind?
Oh, well, I think we might be on a similar page, but probably Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, and just the impacts he had off the bench for Manchester back in his heyday.
Let's hop right into the topic of the day, which is what makes football interesting to watch. So I gave a little bit of intro about this, about how if you're new to the sport, and hopefully if you're listening to the podcast, it's because you want to get into the sport of football or you want to get more information on it, watch with some friends that are really passionate about it, or maybe get into the World Cup, which is coming up in just a few weeks from now. And I know Andrew and I are really excited about that, and we'll do some episodes. Wait. I know, right? We'll do some episodes on that topic. But if you're wondering about the sport, and one of the biggest barriers for you might be the pace of the game, or not knowing what's happening, or not seeing action or goals go in, then this episode is for you. And what we'll talk about first is really what gets us both excited about watching a game or watching a match of football, and then talk a little bit about the different areas of the game that you can really look for. Even if you're more starting out to the sport or getting into the sport, things that you can look out for every game to get yourself more into the game and get yourself more involved, and ultimately make the game stand out and more enjoyable for you. So I think I'll start out talking about just different moments that made matches really exciting for me. Obviously, they do include goals. I think one of the things that Andrew and I want to talk about is goals make games exciting. That's for sure. Like if a game always, let's say, Andrew, tell me how you'd feel if the team that you supported always tied or drew 0-0, 0-0, or 1-1. How would you feel watching a game like that every single week for 38 weeks?
Oh man, I think that would be brutal. I think even looking at Chelsea right now, I think they've had like what 5 draws in a row or something, and I'm sure their fans don't love to see that. But in some cases, and we'll talk about this, a draw is a great result. It's precious points, but you want to see players putting it all out on the line. You want to see aggressive tactics. You want to see goals going in, and you want victory. I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah. And thinking back about the times that made a match really special for me is Manchester United, the club that both Andrew and I support, played a club from France called PSG back in this competition called the Champions League a few years back, and the Champions League is a tournament that's held every single year, so it's a lot more frequent than the World Cup, so it's very exciting to get into. And it involves a lot of teams from Europe, and you have to qualify. You have to do well in your usual league play and get high enough position in order to qualify for this tournament. And I remember watching the Manchester United team go in 2-0 down and thinking, we don't really have much of a chance. They have some famous players. Our team doesn't look that great right now. We're really scrappy. And then somehow we win the game 3-1 with a penalty as the last goal of the game close to the 90th minute. And those are the nights, those are the competitions that have you screaming at the top of your lungs, where you don't think your team's going to pull it out. And a lot of fans can probably empathize with this, but you don't think your team's going to pull it out. And then in the last gasp, with the last breath of the game, something happens and the tides turn. And that's what makes football so interesting and special to watch for me. Obviously, that emotional connection and that excitement for the game. Andrew, what would you say? Is there a moment for you or an anecdote for you that you can remember off the top of your head that got you really excited or really interested in a match?
Oh man, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. I remember the 2010 World Cup when Landon Donovan scored that last gasp goal against Algeria. Man. And just screaming. I grew up watching the U.S. men's team and especially supporting Donovan because I loved the Earthquakes, and I still do. And back when he played for the Earthquakes, it was just such a special, special moment.
Andrew, why don't you kick us off with what makes football so unique in terms of the continuous run of play? So there's a lot of differences between the sport of football versus a lot of sports, like maybe the NFL version of football, or maybe other sports that involve balls, volleyball, basketball, baseball, etc. What is continuous run of play? Why does that make football interesting to watch?
Yeah, that's a good question. Continuous run of play, basically the game is always in action, the clock's always running. There's no stoppage of the clock. You can have addition of time at the end of the match and at the end of the first half, but the game is always going, which makes time wasting interesting. It makes a lot of things really interesting about it, and the game is always moving. I think that's one of the things that really drew me to the game initially. Don't get me wrong, I love other American sports. I'm a big basketball guy, hockey guy. And you do have a bit of that, but it's the constant stopping and starting of NFL games that really sometimes it gets to me, and
Hmm.
all the commercials, and just to sit and have 45, 46, 47, sometimes more
Hmm.
minutes of just pure sport is just something that's so exciting to me.
Andrew brought up a really interesting point there, where he talked about something called stoppage time added on afterwards, and a lot of people will know what that is if we describe it a little bit. So if you've ever watched a football match on TV, you'll notice there's a timer that's going on starting from 0:00 all the way to 45 minutes for the first half. And then at the end of 45 minutes, you'll see this plus some kind of number. And a lot of you might be like, plus, is that the amount of subs that a team gets? But no, so that's actually something called stoppage time, where let's say a player somehow gets injured, or the ball goes out of play, or there's some kind of time wasting, or some kind of event that happens during the match that pauses the play for some kind of moment. The clock never stops during the regular time of the match, but a referee often adds time after the regular time, so after 45 minutes or 90 minutes of the clock, to actually make sure that there's enough time for the ball to be in play to, grant players time to to actually play more game time. So that's something called stoppage time. Andrew, what do you think? So we have continuous run of play. What do you think about continuous run of play, and how do you feel like that affects the momentum of games? Because oftentimes you'll see in other sports, there's a lot of, you can take a timeout. Like in basketball, you can take a timeout, right? Like you can call that. In the NFL, you can run plays, first down, second down, third down. In a lot of other sports, there's a lot more whistles blown. How do you feel like a continuous run of 45 minutes affects just the momentum of one team and another team? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting, a really interesting question. I think that it comes down to the fluidity of the game and the shifting and the dynamicism of the game, and how tactics need to be switched on the fly.
Hmm.
And there's no timeouts really. I mean, occasionally during hot matches, you'll get water breaks, and during player injury time, you can get some tactics talk. But it really comes down to the communication of the
Yeah.
players, and things can just shift on a dime. You can have some sort of play that will turn the game on its head, and you wouldn't have had it if the time had stopped or there was a timeout or anything like that. So it's really about the dynamic nature, I think, for me.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with what you said there, Andrew. I think, uh, especially one point that you brought up, which is really interesting, where in a lot of sports, not all sports, but a lot of sports, coaches can actually communicate plays to their players during the game,
Hmm.
right? So in the NFL, you can run a certain play, or in baseball, you can hold up hand signals and things like that. And there's all kinds of ways to communicating to players, but once the game starts, there's no timeouts during the game. Uh, a coach or a manager, as they say in football, uh, has to trust in their players 100%. Would love to talk about individual players now. So I think games, you have tactics, which we won't dive too deeply into today. You have obviously the history of teams, and a lot of the form of the team. So form is how
Yeah.
good a team's been in recent weeks, and how hot they've been, so to speak. But then you have individual players. So there's obviously some exciting players going into the World Cup today, and a lot of exciting players in the leagues that we follow and the teams that we follow, Andrew. I think a few exciting players I can think of today bring a lot of flair to the game. So if you're watching a game for the first time, and you don't know what's happening and you don't see goals, one thing that I think myself and Andrew would definitely encourage you to do is look at individual players. If you can't see at a bird's eye view what's happening, when the ball's passed to someone, look at what they're doing with the ball. A lot of players will do different things. Some players are super tricky and versatile and really technical with the ball, and they'll try to juke out defenders. And a lot of people love seeing that, love seeing the tricks. A lot of Brazilian players, Vinicius Jr., Neymar, a lot of have a lot of flair and love making defenders topple over and then passing the ball. And then some players are incredible passers of the ball. So if you've ever seen a player on one side of the pitch or the field passing it 50 yards all the way to the other side with just a simple, it looks effortless to them, you can admire that as well. So exciting players are definitely part of what makes football so interesting to watch. Andrew, who would you say are your standouts, or maybe one or two players that you can think of right now that are incredible to watch or exciting to watch and makes you more pumped while you're watching a match?
Yeah, I think obviously he's the hot topic right now. It's Erling Haaland. I'm a backstory. I'm a Borussia Dortmund fan. Became a fan in 2013 when they had that amazing Champions League run. I was living in Germany and studying there at the time, and the host family I was living with was a big Dortmund fan house. So, I mean, just looking at him, he had something like, I just pulled it up. He had something like 86 goals in 89 games for Dortmund. And now, for City, he's just unstoppable. He scored
robot.
2 today. He's got something like 22 across all competitions and I think 17 in the Premier League. I mean, he's just blowing away the competition. And I think with him, the fact that he's so young, his physicality is so strong. He can just shrug off defenders like they're no one. And I think his football IQ as well is really high, and I'm really excited to see him mature. I fear for the rest of the Premier League when he matures and continues to do so, but he just always finds himself in the right place at the right time. And he's someone that, even as a United fan, I just love watching right now.
Yeah.
How about for you, Harry?
I think for me, it'd have to be Beckham. Growing up watching Beckham, he's one of the players that got me into the sport. His right foot. Obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably don't need an intro to who David Beckham is. He's also, obviously, a lot of people know him outside of football because of just him being a superstar around the world. But a lot of people don't actually recognize how good of a player he was. He started off at Manchester United as an academy player, and this means you grew up at the club before you got into kind of the first flight team. And then he went to Real Madrid, and then he went to a few other clubs, AC Milan, came to the MLS, to America as well. So he was just an incredible player, and his trademark was he would swing in these amazing crosses, and crosses are balls that usually the midfielders would pass into close to the goal so the strikers can either head it or score a goal, and his accuracy was just pinpoint, just incredible. So he was just a joy to watch. So obviously those two players are exciting players. We can talk about individual talent, and then goals are always interesting. Andrew, tell me, let's say if there is a team that's really, really attacking versus a team that they call in the sport that sits back and soaks up pressure. So an example of this in the Premier League are teams like last season, there's a team called Burnley, and they actually use something called a low block, which is when pretty much all the players on the team form the Great Wall of England on the field, literally, and then they sit back and they make sure that no one from the opposing team can get through, pass the ball. They pretty much congest the whole field to make sure nothing gets through. If there's if there's a game like that and there's a really attacking team, let's say Manchester City or even Liverpool or teams like that, against a defensive team like that, what would make that interesting? Because obviously, maybe to the layperson, it might be frustrating watching a game like that where someone's trying to break through and they're not able to break through. What still makes a game like that interesting to watch?
Yeah, I think it's the adjustment of tactics. I mean, it's really one tactical, format versus another, and we can talk about, certain tactical formations after, but when you have a team setting up a low block like Burnley did last season, and you have teams that are extremely attacking like Liverpool, like City, even like Chelsea, I mean, the ability to break down teams, especially in tight areas, it really requires a mastery of, individual talent, team play, and it just makes it that much more exciting when teams score goals.
One thing that a lot of people that are newer to the sport of football end up watching is they watch both ends of the field. So if you're looking as a new fan of soccer or football, usually you're like, I feel like your field of vision blocks out the middle of the field, and you look at, okay, if they're getting closer to the goal, my excitement goes up. And of course, everyone's excitement goes up when another team gets close to the goal and they get close to scoring. But what would help as a newer fan is you could absolutely take a look at the middle of the field and look at how many passes, even start to count how many passes one team makes in a row. There's this concept of keeping possession of the ball, and this statistic is probably cited the most, top three most statistics in every commentator or analyst that breaks down the game. This team had 60% possession over 40% possession. The reason that possession is so important is because when you have the ball, you can do something with the ball and score a goal, tire the other team out. So the next time you're a newer football fan, watch the team that maybe you're cheering for, rooting for, and see how many passes they can string in a row. A lot of teams that are really good with the ball and can string some passes together will string 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 passes with no problem. And that's when you start to see the team, wow, this is really cool that they can pass in such tight angles and between two players and cut them off, and then start having another player run onto the ball and make their way slowly but surely through this, great wall of England that one team is setting up. And it's really, really interesting to see things like that. So if there's a practical tip Andrew and I can give you, definitely take a look at which team has the ball and what they're doing with it and how they're passing, or if they're getting intercepted and losing the ball all the time.
Yeah, definitely. And to play off of that, looking at the different focal points of the team, a lot of teams have big time playmakers and guys that are, really the linchpin of setting up attacks,
Yeah.
and things like that. They're the big time dispersers of, well placed balls, things like that. So that's one of the exciting points about, what's happening in the middle and how the play is progressing, for sure.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk a little bit about formations. There's a lot of numbers. It sounds like we're speaking code. Sounds like, Morse language or something else. So when you hear or see a formation, if you're watching a match on television, you might see, the commentators say this team is lining up in a 4-2-3-1, or this team is lining up in a 3-4-3. So if you add any of these numbers up, they always come out to 10. So in football, there's 10 outfield players and one goalkeeper, so 11 players on one team. So the way that you line up your players and the shape of the team in the outfield, besides the goalkeeper, is the formation in football. So Andrew, what would you say makes certain formations interesting to watch?
Yeah, so I think you touched on it. Definitely certain managers, bosses, or gaffers, whatever you want to call them.
Yes.
They have, specific visions for what the team should look like formation wise. And there are a lot of, like Rangnick, there are a lot of coaches that line up pretty much the same every time. And sometimes it can be tuned by players, by opponents. And I think that's one of the reasons that makes football managers so important, and why there's so much pressure put on them is how they're lining up, how they envision their players playing. You hear a lot about 4-3-3s, 4-4-2s, all sorts of different layouts. And I think it's really interesting when you get two different teams, two different ideas on formation, and seeing how they clash.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really what makes it really exciting. And sometimes the tactics, they get them right, how they line up. They're like, okay, that was spot on for that opponent, but sometimes they get them very wrong. And when they get them very wrong, it's very, very evident, and things are just not clicking. They're not dealing with opposing players. And a lot of times the formation is not suiting their player strengths. And that's a really, really key thing, because you want to get the most out of your players.
I think one thing you hit upon, Andrew, that's really interesting for our listeners to think about is formation, how that suits the players. Because a lot of formations are, let's say you take a defensive formation where you play something called three at the back, which is you line up with three central defenders, and then you might have left and right defenders or left and right backs. And a back in football is just part of the back line. They're defenders. Um, you might have you might want to play that way as a coach or a manager, but a lot of the players you put in there might be more attacking minded or attacking focused, and they might be really weak on in the back line or in the defensive side of it. So as a manager, you have to be really, really cognizant of what kind of players you have. And if you have really quick players on the wings, maybe you want to play counter-attacking football where you ping the ball to them and then they make a run. It's like a running back. The important thing here for our listeners is you don't have to know every formation. We don't even know every formation. You don't have to know the ins and outs of every formation, how they're good or bad. But look at the players again and look at the team and look at how the other team is interacting with the formation that they're putting up. And like Andrew said, it can definitely be more entertaining if one manager or coach gets it horribly wrong, because then the other team's gonna overwhelm them and just score 3, 4, 5 goals. But it's also really interesting when it's like a chess match and both teams are battling it out. Again, we're talking about in the middle of the field, and that's where a lot of the game is played and football is played. And I think that brings us to a really good point of something called a draw in football, or a tie, where two teams are battling it out and they have a lot of evenly matched players, and the formation is really a back and forth. No one's really breaking through. Why would a tie, for the life of me, as an American watching sports and having everything be exciting, even our commercials are like boom, bam, pow. How can I make the most sound and have the most colors in these commercials? Why would a tie or a draw in football ever, ever, ever be exciting or interesting to watch?
I think it's a good point. I mean, I think first off, in most leagues, getting a tie still gets you points.
Mm-hmm.
So
break that down for us. So how many points do you get for every result as a team?
Yeah, so 3 for a win, 1 for a tie, 0 for a loss. And so getting even just 1 point can be, and we could talk about this later, but relegation down to a lower league, getting demoted, and not staying up in the top league. I mean, it's that crucial. And I think sometimes, when you have two really evenly matched teams, getting a tie, again, Manchester United bias, but we got, a great tie today against Chelsea, who was a great opponent. And, we had a stoppage time tie. And I think things like that just are really exciting, even where, getting a goal that ties it up makes it almost as exciting as a win. Of course you want to win, but, at the last minute, tying it up and denying the team a win can be really, really exciting. And then I think too, this is true in American sports, but everyone loves an underdog team.
Oh, 100%.
And it's amazing to see a small club that can score a goal, a fluke goal, a moment of magic or brilliance, and tie up with a team and hold a big team to a 1-1, 2-2, 0-0 even. And I think it really speaks a lot to tactics and formation. Even when a team on paper looks like the obvious team to win, if the other team gets the tactics right, even if they don't have the same caliber players, you can get a tie, and it can be absolutely brilliant to watch because, like you alluded to, Harry, it's like a chess match. Harry, do you want to talk about some of the other aspects of the game, especially overseas? And it's cool to see it slowly trickling into the U.S. as well in the MLS. But, what are some of those aspects that make it unique from other sports?
Yeah. I think personally, just the experience of sitting with people, and this is a very universal feeling, going to a concert or going to any kind of sporting event in person, or going to see a motivational speaker talk in person versus YouTube or Zoom or anything like that, is a different atmosphere. But I think what makes football special is a combination of a lot of the in-person experience. So there's things called tifos, which are flags and banners that people hold up, and oftentimes these banners are held up by groups called ultras. Or these are pretty much, you could think of them as ultra supporters of the club. They're like die-hard, hardcore fans that go to every match and hold up kind of supportive banners of their team. There's people, that sneak in flares and set them off. There's people that have firecrackers and sing songs until their lungs go out, and wear scarves and kind of are flinging things all over the place and shouting. And a lot of it, we obviously don't want to see anything get out of hand or any kind of riots or anything dangerous or fights or anything like that. But the passion from the fans in person and being one with one atmosphere with, maybe 75 to 80,000 people in the same place at the same time, shouting the same thing and cheering is just another level. And I think the experience of football combined with the history, because the history of the game goes back, 150 almost years from now, and it's going to go on long after we're gone. And I think that's something you can't replace, no matter what sport it is around the world. One of the oldest sports that we know and play and is active today in the world. Andrew, what do you think? What are your thoughts on the in-person experience and atmosphere and what that brings to a football match and why that makes it more interesting?
Yeah, it's an incredible experience, like you said. I mean, just the fans are so into it, and the singing. I mean, I don't really know of any other sports where there's singing in unison. Whether it's "You'll Never Walk Alone" and at Anfield for Liverpool, or it's chants. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible, and the fans really live and breathe the team. I mean, and it doesn't matter. That's the awesome thing too. It doesn't matter if you're a Barcelona or Real Madrid, or you're in the National League like Wrexham, for those of you watching the current show on Hulu. I mean, people love their team, and it's something that's just part of the culture, and it's great to see it come into the U.S. Having been to a couple MLS games myself, and I know you have too, Harry. It's just something that really, there's so much history and culture, which we'll talk about in later episodes, but there's just so much more to it than two 11-man sides playing with one ball.
It is very true where, because of the history of the sport, people have been following for, as long as they've been alive. For the Chelsea United game today, I was at a pub, and there were a group of 3 people from Manchester that were watching, and they've been season ticket holders for 20 years. And they've been to every match, and they've been in the highs and lows. And that emotional tie, obviously, you don't want your mental health to be affected by a sport. And if you ever feel like that's happening, it's good to step away for a little bit. And I know I've felt that. And I know you felt that as well, Andrew. But if you have followed a team and rooted for them and, cheered for them with your like blood, sweat, and tears, the emotion that you've invested. And even if you're newer to the sport, and we'll talk about this actually next episode when we talk about how you can pick a football club to follow or to support and to cheer for. After you start to watch even 2, 3, or 4 games, you're like, oh my gosh, I want this player to succeed. And you're so invested in certain tactics of the team or the growth of certain players, and you see just the hope is what kills you, but it's also what makes you that much more excited about games. And I think that's part of the experience. Let's move on to our last 2 topics of just the history of the game. And I think this is a great segue because we talked about history. So, Andrew, what do you think are maybe one key moment in your perspective from the history of the game that makes football so interesting to watch, and where do you think the game is going in terms of kind of making it more interesting?
I think one thing you touched on was kind of the technology aspect, and it's impossible to avoid. And whatever your opinion, VAR,
Yes,
video playback and reviewing plays so that you can retroactively make decisions or overturn decisions. Similar to reviews in hockey and in American football. I think that's been a really interesting part of the game. It's got its pros, it's got its cons. I think today goal line technology is so interesting. Where it's so hard to tell. It's a matter of millimeters whether the ball crossed the plane of the goal, and referees can know based on the buzzing of their watch on their hand. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. So I think, for better or for worse, we're seeing more technology. The stadiums were more technologically advanced. I know I was talking to a buddy 2 weekends ago, actually at the LA Galaxy Earthquakes game, and he was saying that Manchester City now have scarves. They sell fans that monitor their biometrics to understand how fans are interacting with the game and their emotions, which is just crazy to me. But I think that's a direction we're heading.
For all the things that make football interesting to watch, sometimes it can be boring. It is very true. Sometimes you're watching a game. I've done this before. I've woken up at 6 a.m. I'm watching a game. I'm like, no, why did I wake up? I regret my life right now. Sometimes it's the tactics. Sometimes a team just does not want the ball and they'll want to sit back and just block the ball all day. Sometimes a team is like intentionally playing for a tie or a draw, or sometimes the players are so bad they give the ball all the way all the time. They give the ball away all the time. And I'm not gonna name drop any leagues, but there's a lot of leagues that we know that the players are really, really bad for the professional level, obviously compared to the best players in the world. So I guess super quickly, Andrew, what would you say are some things that personally, maybe one or two things that you feel like would make a match or the sport in general really boring to watch?
Yeah, I mean, I think for as interesting as draws can be, I think that they can also be really boring.
Yeah.
And I think, especially when teams aren't creating chances, it's definitely an emotional sport, not just for the spectators, but the players as well. And you can 100% tell when the players are not up for it. And when they're not up for it, it can either be a terrible loss or it can just be really boring. And, I think that's part of it. And then, I think there are games where your best players aren't playing for whatever reason, and that is a little bit boring. I mean, you love the team, but when you're not seeing, your top scorer, start the game, you get a little bit bummed. You want to see dramatics, you want to see superb goals, and I think, it really comes down to, that 90 minutes, what's going to happen on the pitch, and it'll decide whether it was a good one or a bad one or just plain boring.
I would say also, let's say a team is starting to learn how to play together as well. Let's say the season's just started and the team got 4 or 5 new players, maybe a new coach, new manager, and they just don't click. And watching a team like that where they're trying to force something and they don't know how to play just sometimes can be really boring as well, because they're constantly not in sync with each other. I mean, let's say you've been friends with someone for 10, 15 years, you almost can say their next sentence. You know what they're going to do and what they're going to say and how they would act in a certain situation. It's the same for professional football players and teams, where if you play long enough with each other, you'll know if someone's going to make a run or if someone's going to be available for a pass or if someone's going to look at you and shout for the ball. And if a team is constantly losing the ball all the time or not playing to their potential, that can definitely be demoralizing or also boring to watch and frustrating. What are your kind of last comments for advice you would give a new fan or someone that's been a fan for a while on how to watch a game and what to note to make it more interesting?
This is something that I try to do is, really try to, I don't know, just be excited for games. I know that sounds weird, but I think sometimes I can get, myself and other fans can get in their heads about the way a game should go, how it should go down. And, just like in life, that's not always going to happen. And I think being open to the possibility of dramatics and, the ups and the downs, I think that's just part of it. So, yeah, keeping your mind open.
When you're watching the sport, if you're looking at the goals and expecting something to come, you may always be disappointed if the team never scores. So open up your vision or mind just a little bit to look at the players that have the ball, but also the players that don't have the ball. I think that's actually key that a lot of people watching the sport don't realize is the team that has the ball. There's one person that has the ball and 10 other players on the team that don't have the ball, right? But those 10 other players are doing something. They're not just frozen and then that one player just dribbles all over the place. Those 10 players are making runs or calling for the ball and being dynamic, and you see the ball going from here to here to here in the midfield and slowly making its way to the other end of the pitch. So I would say, kind of my closing thoughts, celebrate every pass, celebrate every run, and celebrate every almost chance. If a player almost gets the ball and gets a shot off, that's really exciting. One, be excited, and two, take apart the little actions in the moments besides goals, and you should be able to enjoy and get a little bit more interest out of watching a match. So that was it for today. Today's episode about what makes football interesting to watch. We are the Super Subs with
Andrew
and Harry, and tune in next time for this will be next week for how to pick, select, choose your first ever football team or club to support. So if you don't have one currently, we'll be talking and diving a little bit into how to actually choose one for yourself. So definitely don't miss that for next week. And signing off for now, we'll catch you next time.